Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. And of course, our Korea Now's soul sisters, Kwon So-hwa and Choi Ji-hee, joins us in the studio. Guys, welcome back.
Hi, guys. Hello.
All right. And I always look forward to the hellos that come from them. There's a lot of laughing going on here. But there is no laughing going on when it comes to North Korea's continued provocations here. We're going to start things off with some of the responses on North Korea's latest ICBM test, which was conducted last Friday. We also mentioned yesterday that was also presided by Kim Jong-un's second child there. His daughter was present as well. So we did preview it briefly yesterday. The UN Security Council convening a meeting on Monday following Pyongyang's latest missile provocation there. But again, I mean, we always say, what can we really expect out of all this? But and rightfully so. And what we did expect here was the fact that there was not much of an outcome, right?
Right. The outcome was a mere joint denouncement, but no concrete new measures in the form of a resolution. The UN Security Council remains divided on how harsh the council should respond towards North Korea's missile launches, with the latest having been an intercontinental ballistic missile going by the name Hwasong-17 last Friday. So while the 15 members of the UNSC see eye to eye on that the unprecedented number of ballistic missile launches, of which the North conducted more than 60 this year, I think 63 is the exact number, is unacceptable. Not everyone, though, is on the same page in terms of strong measures, such as imposing new sanctions. And it happens to be China and Russia, which are two of the 5 permanent UNSC members that do not want extra restrictions imposed on the North Korean regime. The U.S., which had called for this emergency meeting, at which South Korea and Japan, by the way, also took part as countries involved in the North Korean peninsula situation, accused Beijing and Moscow for obstructing the international community from trying to hold North Korea accountable for its provocative actions. These two countries blame the U.S. for North Korea's continued military actions.
Of course, we do know, as always, Beijing and Moscow are going to be the two that's always going to be vetoing here. We always get a very interesting sort of argument as to why they vetoed it from China. Their argument's always quite interesting. They don't just specifically say, well, we're just going to be allies with North Korea and we're siding with them all the way. They always have an interesting take on it. What were their arguments?
Well, China's ambassador to the UN, Zhang Jun, expressed his concerns of an, quote, upward spiral of rising tension and intensifying confrontation on the Korean peninsula, and said the UNSC should ease tensions rather than always condemn and pressure North Korea. He said that all parties should remain calm and exercise restraint, and they should also act and speak with caution to avoid any actions that could escalate tensions and then eventually lead to miscalculation. And then make the situation fall into a vicious cycle. And Russia's deputy UN ambassador Anna Evstikneva said the reason for North Korea's intensifying aggression is, quote, Washington's desire to force Pyongyang into unilateral disarmament by implementing sanctions and exerting force. She also criticized the military drills by the U.S. and its allies, urging for inter-Korean dialogue and multilateral negotiations. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, said Washington is prepared to meet with the North without preconditions, but pointed out Pyongyang is not responding and instead chooses to continue what she called reckless behavior, and which is why the UNSC must instead respond. With that, the U.S. diplomat offered another opportunity for the members to speak in one voice against the North's rhetoric and actions, as the U.S. plans to propose a presidential statement, which is a step below a legally binding resolution, to condemn the missile launches and to urge the North to abide by existing UN sanctions that ban the reclusive country from carrying out ballistic missile and nuclear tests. So that may put some pressure on China and Russia to join the other members, at least for this statement, because they won't, they are not on the same page when it comes to sanctions and a resolution. All they do is they come up with a statement, but this time the U.S. is trying to get them to sign this so-called presidential statement.
Right.
Meanwhile, we also, as I mentioned, Seoul's envoy to the UN was also there, somewhat like an observer. Hwang Jung-guk, he actually also indirectly criticized China and Russia as well, saying that North Korea is continuing its provocations because the UN Security Council is not, agreeing on how to respond to North Korea. And this is why the North is continuing with its development also when it comes to nuclear development.
Yeah, just, very quickly here. Number one, Russia's deputy UN ambassador can argue all they want and say that, you need inter-Korean dialogue. Again, just like U.S. Ambassador to UN Linda Thomas-Greenfield said, I mean, Washington has been open for dialogue. It's that North Korea just doesn't want to respond, and I'm not surprised. The current Yoon administration, they've also been saying that they're open for talks, and North Korea just responded with all these different messages about how, they're not a big fan of the Yoon administration right now, the current administration, or the government right now, or the country in itself. So there was absolutely no doubt. I think even with the previous administration, with the more liberal Moon administration, they've been calling for a dialogue with North, but there was just no response. And so how do you do that? And at the same time, in some ways, like, it does make sense. Like, China's argument, it's not 100% wrong in that, and also Russia as well, in that if they do start slapping these sanctions on North Korea, will they really end up stopping their provocations, or is it going to urge them to even conduct more missile tests and just firing away everywhere as if they got nothing to lose here? And so that's the other concern. But of course, we're talking about ballistic missile tests. Consensus is that if they do conduct a nuclear test, that China and Russia might be forced to not veto any of the sanctions there.
When it comes to China's argument, some people might think actually that could be a better idea to just, stay calm and then, make North Korea and not provoke North Korea to do more in terms of missile tests. But this is, if you think of it as simply as North Korea being a child, for instance, it's like you treat a spoiled child if you do not punish the child for what it keeps doing, and just do what China is asking for the international
just community to
do. Yeah, then I don't think that's a good idea.
No, well, I mean, the other comparison that I was making, it's interesting that you mentioned child, is because even if the U.S. or South Korea, they don't do anything. You know how like a child always wants to get attention, and so they start throwing things at you and making you pick it up, and so that they could get attention. And that's the other thing that North Korea does when they feel like none of the attention is towards them. Like when everything was kind of focused on Ukraine issue, and they're like, oh my goodness, no one is focusing on us anymore. We're not a threat anymore because there's a bigger issue, and that's when provocations starting and things like that. And so again, you're right. I mean, it's a good comparison talking about a spoiled child there. Moving on here, amidst the controversies surrounding the UN Security Council's diminishing functionality here, there are appeals for substantive reform, while others insisting on increasing the number of permanent members of the council. The South Korean government voicing expanding general member states. Let's get the details of this.
Sure. So the General Assembly opened its annual debate on Security Council reform on the 17th in the UN headquarters in New York. That's last week. And speakers once again renewed their appeals for enlarging the 15-member organ and updating its working methods to make it more transparent, inclusive, representative, accountable, and effective in a world facing a series of challenges. And regarding one critical point on whether to increase the number of permanent members of the council, Hwang Jung-guk, a South Korean ambassador to the UN, argued that adding permanent members will undermine the council's adaptability and sustainability, as well as the relevance over the long term. And expanding the permanent membership basically means, he said, particular countries are being added to Article 23 of the United Nations Charter. But he went on to say, once we add those names, we cannot change them. And if we truly want the Security Council to reflect the constantly evolving international reality, there's no choice but to hold regular elections. And he said a one-time election that assures a seat forever isn't really an election in the true sense. And member states must seriously consider either adding particular countries to Article 23 or holding regular elections for representatives of an enlarged council, he said, and also urged delegations to engage in depth during intergovernmental negotiations. And he also added election candidates may be new or already on the board, and in either case, we will establish a mechanism to regularly hold all UN member states accountable to the Security Council. Well, currently, Italy, Spain, Canada, Mexico, and Argentina, including South Korea, are arguing to expand the size of the council, not just guaranteeing more seats for the permanent members, but they want to focus on enlarging the size, focusing more on the developing countries and elaborating the membership terms of the elected council. On the other hand, the so-called G4 countries such as Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil are insisting on expanding the permanent members. And this is partly because major countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom are also optimistic about the measures to expand the number of permanent members. And the British ambassador to the United States, Barbara Woodard, suggested increasing the number of permanent members, and she actually cited specific countries such as Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil. And the United States is embracing both positions of increasing the permanent and general members of the council. However, as China, which is one of the permanent members, currently prefers to maintain the existing system, it's really unclear whether the Security Council's size really can be expanded.
Okay, so you're talking about the British ambassador to the United Nations, right?
Yes.
In the United States.
Oh,
yeah. I mean, but okay. So here's the thing, though. Like, even if they do expand the number of permanent members, right? The biggest issue has always been kind of like China and Russia vetoing, because they have the veto power as the permanent member. So expanding the number really doesn't change anything. I know recently there's been talks about removing Russia from the permanent membership there, which also, I mean, argument could be made that's not fair. Argument could also be made that maybe that's the right thing to do, but there's also going to be China. And then if, let's say, their countries are trying to also remove China, then it's definitely really not fair, right? You're just basically removing all the countries that are not on the same page as everyone else. And so it just, I mean, I don't know, just expanding permanent membership, I don't think it's going to make a whole lot of difference. I think the one thing that will make a huge difference is if Russia indeed does get removed from permanent membership, but which I think is highly unlikely unless they do something really, really crazy. And, some experts are saying that it's maybe a possibility moving forward with Ukraine. While North Korea does continue, unfortunately, with their missile firings here in South Korea, developers are continuing to upgrade missile defense capabilities. This Tuesday, South Korea succeeded in a missile interception test of its LSAM system. So let's get the details of this.
Sure. So let's start off what an LSAM system is. It stands for Long Range Surface-to-Air Missile, and its main function is to shoot down ballistic missiles at an altitude of 50 to 60 kilometers. So, of course, the main focus is on shooting down North Korean ballistic missiles. Yeah. And that makes it similar to the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense, or THAAD system of the U.S. The LSAM project is led by the state-run Agency for Defense Development and involves a number of local defense firms. Earlier this year, we've heard from Hanwha Systems having unveiled a radar prototype for the LSAM system and other related progresses. And now, this Tuesday, South Korean military officials announced the country's first successful test of its LSAM system, meaning it succeeded in hitting target missiles. Early in February, they also had a test that was a flight test that they conducted back then. Now, according to the Agency for Defense Development, the system is to be completed by 2024, with mass production to start in 2026, and then actual deployment as early as 2027. The agency also announced a plan for the development of a homegrown anti-drone jamming system that includes navigation jamming, radio jamming, control network jamming equipment. Now, jammers are used to drone out conversations between a drone and its operator, meaning a disruption can make the drone fall out of the sky. So
Yeah, no, I was just looking at how this is going to impact some of the ballistic missiles that we've seen launched by North Korea. So this basically targets ballistic missiles at an altitude of 50 to 60 kilometers. And if indeed North Korea, because North Korea, if they're going to, let's say, and goodness, God forbid, this never happens. If they do decide they're going to shoot a ballistic missile towards South Korea, they're not going to use an intercontinental ballistic missile. It makes absolutely no sense. The only thing I think they're probably going to be using is a short-range ballistic missile, right? Which is something that we've seen a lot of SRBMs. And the most recent SRBM that was launched, it flew 240 kilometers, which covers obviously the distance to hit one of the major cities here in South Korea, and the apogee of around 47 kilometers. So it can intercept basically short-range ballistic missiles, and I think that's an important thing here.
I think it's the development of Korean missile defense systems is also a positive development in terms of relations with China, because we might be less dependent on THAAD in the future if we have more of our own homegrown systems.
Right. So then that would solve like two things, right? Number one, by removing THAAD, although I don't know the United States. If United States, what they say is true, and that they're not putting the THAAD system to kind of use the radar system to kind of check out China or anything like that, they would have no problems, right, to remove THAAD. And you're absolutely right. If LSAM, if it's just South Korea, China probably would not have any problems, yet still, like you said, solve the issue of North Korea's continued threats here. I'm just doing like all these things about the other ballistic missiles. An intermediate range ballistic missile would still do damage with this LSAM here. In the meantime, the North Atlantic Council agreeing back in September to accept the request of South Korea to designate its embassy to Belgium as the country's mission to NATO. This is the country's newly established mission, and they will be officially beginning its operation starting on the 22nd, which is today, but local time. Jihee, let's get more on that.
Sure. So according to the South Korean Foreign Ministry, Ambassador Yoon Sung-gu, who has been named as the head of the mission, will present his credentials to NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg in, is it Jens?
Jens Stoltenberg.
Stoltenberg in Brussels on Tuesday local time and begin his official duties. Yoon is currently also the country's top envoy to Belgium, the EU, and Luxembourg. And South Korea, in fact, decided to establish the mission in June ahead of President Yoon Suk-yeol's participation in a NATO summit later that month. And this was made official during Yoon's attendance at the NATO summit, which was held in Madrid back then. And it was accepted by NATO at the end of September. So it's been 2 months.
Yeah.
It took 2 months for the mission to actually officially take office. And this was made. The ministry said South Korea will further institutionalize its cooperative relationship with NATO and, quote unquote, actively participate in activities related to various issues promoted by NATO, including those related to cyber defense and climate change. Now, South Korea has remained an active NATO partner since early 2000s, 2005 that is, based on shared values, but then no permanent mission has been established during those period. This was also quite different from NATO's other partners in the Asia-Pacific region because Japan, Australia, and New Zealand, they all had established delegations and had the Belgian ambassador serve as NATO's representative, but it was quite belated for South Korea to join and have its own established mission for NATO. And the South Korean government is expected to deepen cooperation with NATO in emerging security areas such as cyber and space, and seek to expand cooperation in the defense industry as well. Meanwhile, regarding North Korea's recent missile launches, NATO strongly condemned its provocative actions and urged the regime to stop its reckless behavior, saying that these provocations undermine regional stability and jeopardize the prospects for peace on the Korean Peninsula. NATO's spokesperson, Oana Lungescu, reportedly, I hope I pronounced that right, reportedly said on Monday that NATO strongly condemns North Korea's recent missile tests as dangerous, direct violations of multiple United Nations Security Council resolutions.
All right, we're going to move on, guys, and talk about some updates regarding what's still very much recent. It's been less than a month still, the 1029 tragedy. We're talking about the Itaewon Crowd Crush accident there. The families of the victims of that very tragedy holding their very first press conference this afternoon. This is more than 3 weeks after the deadly stampede that led to just way too many innocent lives being lost. Now, the families are calling for proper apologies from the government, not to mention some appropriate follow-up measures. They're calling for those to be responsible for them to be punished. Let's get more on this.
Right. So this morning, the bereaved families of the victims of this Itaewon disaster held a press conference, and this was hosted by the Lawyers for a Democratic Society, October 29 Itaewon Disaster Truth Investigation and Legal Support Task Force. That's a direct translation of the whole name in Korean. And this was held in Seoul. And the victims' families demanded thorough measures to prevent the recurrence of any such catastrophe and also punish those who are responsible for the tragedy. This was the first time in 24 days since the disaster that the bereaved families held an official press conference together. And at the conference, one of the family members criticized the lack of regulation and management at the narrow alleys of the Itaewon districts on the night of the tragedy, despite speculations that the area would need extra personnel to handle the expected huge number of crowds. And a parent of one of the victims also vented her resentment, saying it's impossible to let go of her son without even knowing the exact cause, location, and time of his death. And the task force of the tragedy so far have received the requests of the bereaved families of 34 victims and is legally representing them. And the 6 major requests to be delivered to the government are number 1, sincere apologies, number 2, strict and thorough accountability, number 3, truth and accountability to ensure the victim participation, number 4, active support such as guaranteeing communication and humanitarian measures for the victims, and number 5, proactive measures for full remembrance of the victims, and number 6, a statement of position and a preparation for specific measures to prevent secondary harm. And the representative lawyer of the task force said specific legal measures to be taken would be officially announced after discussing with the bereaved families.
Yeah, and you know what? This is where it gets very tricky. I think the first one, an earnest apology, it's going to come. Obviously, truth and accountability to ensure victim participation. That probably is going to come as well. Active support. That's going to come. Proactive measures for full remembrance of the victims. That's going to come as well. Statement of position, preparation of specific measures to prevent secondary harm. Again, we say, unfortunately, it always happens after a major accident like this happens. It's going to come. But the biggest thing, again, is strict and thorough accountability, finding out who is really responsible, because from the get-go, from the very beginning, it seems like those in the bottom are being blamed here. And there's been basically those in the higher ups are basically trying not to get take any responsibility. So we'll see whether or not they're also able to get the second one that they've requested here. The presidential office, meanwhile, looking into ways to enact a law to properly compensate the victims of the 1029 tragedy. So let's get more on this.
Sure. Just before that, may I just read out this breaking news that came out from Kim Yo-jong, the sister by North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, who seems to have denounced the UN Security Council, their meeting that they just held and that we talked about before. And it looks like she is criticizing how they are having double standards.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah,
found it
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
We haven't heard from Kim Yo-jong lately.
Yeah, Choi Sun-hee has been the vocal one these days, and there you have it. Kim Yo-jong is also going to be very vocal in regards to this. But so let's get the updates now regarding the presidential office once again looking ways to enact a law to properly compensate the victims of the
Sure.
1029 tragedy.
So this issue came up during a cabinet meeting this Tuesday. President Yoon Suk-yeol called on officials to review the establishment of a special law to properly compensate or support the victims and bereaved families of the Itaewon tragedy. Discussions on such law are probably going to take concrete shape once the first round of results of the police's investigation of the incident are announced, as compensation issues will depend on who is found responsible for the deadly accident, of course. Regarding that probe, President Yoon this Tuesday also called on thorough investigation of the cause, and he also said he's expected to soon meet with experts to look into comprehensive measures to improve public safety. Now, at the National Assembly, meanwhile, there are some discrepancies. The main opposition Democratic Party is aiming to pass a motion to open a parliamentary probe into the Itaewon tragedy this week. However, the ruling People Power Party had proposed to agree to such probe if it is launched after the national budget is passed, and the budget proposal deadline is December 2nd. But the DP and other opposition parties have submitted their plan for a 60-day parliamentary investigation on Monday, looking for approval. The DP this Tuesday reiterated to pass a motion under any circumstances, and they want it passed during a plenary session on Thursday.
Look, this is one again. I mean, one of the things that I was listening to. I don't know if you guys know Rafael Rashid. He's a foreign journalist here in South Korea, and he was covering the recent presser. This was a couple of weeks ago with Prime Minister Han Duck-soo. He had a foreign media outlet presser,
I know
right?
that one, yeah.
And what he was saying is the way that it's being covered by Korean media and what the foreign media outlets are covering when it comes to the 1029 tragedy is very different. And he was saying for many of the Korean outlets, it's been very politicized, and it's unfortunate that there's a lot of politics involved with this. Now, number one, it is a good thing that any party, whether it be the ruling or the main opposition party, does anything to basically start a probe into finding out who is responsible for this. But I think the most important thing, if they're going to go through a probe, that it's not about just targeting a specific member of the party or anything like that, just directly finding out who is responsible for this. And I think the consensus right now at this time is the fact that there was no protocol in place. But I'm just hoping that if there's any kind of investigation, it's not just basically a move for any of the party members to blame each other and say, you did wrong, this party did wrong, this party did wrong, but more in trying to keep those that are actually responsible for the tragedy to be held accountable here. And it shouldn't be politicized, is what I'm trying to say here. Guys, a lot of things have changed because of the 1029 tragedy. I think a lot of people have been more, concerned over large crowds and things like that. And also because of the atmosphere, it's been less than a month right now. It's not a mood for celebration or cheering, anything like that, which is why initially what we did say was that with the World Cup kicking off, as you guys know, with the football fans, they go out into the streets, whether it be Gwanghwamun, the City Hall, near COEX, wherever you may be, people usually go out and hold these massive gatherings to cheer on the national football team. Initially, they said they weren't going to be doing this because of safety concerns and also in consideration of the mourning period is over, but in consideration of what happened here in the country. But the Seoul Metropolitan Government-related parties deliberated the cheering squad. We're talking about the Red Devils' request to carry out the street cheers under strict safety guidelines this afternoon. From what we did see, just right before the show, I know they were holding the meeting. Was there any kind of conclusion, or are they still holding this meeting right now, Chi-hee?
Well, we're still waiting for the updates because they started the evaluation at 5 p.m. local time, and I believe it's still going on, and we don't have the results yet. But just to give you an overview of how this happened in the background, well, the Seoul city government, like I said, is going through this evaluation with Jongno district on whether to allow street cheering at the the Gwanghwamun Square during Team Korea's matches. And this is really one of the very unique characteristics of Korea because during these festive times, we really go out on the streets. Everybody goes out on the street and cheers. We cheer together. But they're discussing with this advisory group, and this is composed of external experts too, and they're deciding, they're going to decide after reviewing the safety measures and the plan that's been submitted. And the cautious move came as the Korea Football Association initially canceled its application for street cheering events that had been jointly prepared with the city. But then we had the Taewon crowd crush disaster, and that's why it was canceled. And the official fan club of the Korean national football team, like you said, Red Devil, had earlier submitted an application for the dates, expecting a turnout of around 10,000 people during the days when we have the match. And the South Korean national football team will face its matches with Uruguay, Ghana on the 24th, 28th, respectively, and one with Portugal on the 3rd of December. And the Red Devil, they submitted the safety plan yesterday. But then it was returned by the Jongno district because they thought there was a lack of safety management measures in the plan. But it was complemented and submitted again this morning. And the Jongno district, in fact, passed it under some conditions. And now they're going through whether to allow it or not with the Seoul Metropolitan Government and this advisory group. And like I said, I believe it's still continuing and we don't have the results yet.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing with this is, again, I mean, they've had this every World Cup, right? And so because, again, it's an organized event, there are always protocols in place. Now, I don't know why the Red Devils have to send in a safety protocol for all this. It's either the Seoul City or the Cheongno-gu district say okay, and then they're supposed to, of course, obviously set up a protocol in place, as they always do. As long as there's a protocol in place, measures in place, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's been any accidents when it comes to cheering and things like that. And so I don't think that's the big thing. I don't think it's going to be safe, despite the fact that tens and maybe hundreds of thousands of people are probably going to be gathering. It's just a matter of, is it the right time right now? So it's another thing. I think maybe that's one thing that the city is thinking about, because they could potentially get some backlash, right? Saying that it's a little bit too early right now. And yes, I know we should kind of move on. And, you know, there's nothing better than sports to kind of help us kind of, you know, I guess, get rid of all the, you know, the negative thoughts of all the things that happened and things like that. But still, just the timing of it, I think.
The families had the press conference this morning too.
Yeah, right. And then they decide to hold a meeting for this.
Yeah.
So I have mixed feelings about this. Guys, let's talk about COVID-19. And this is something that we've been fearing. New cases soaring to the 70,000 level. Number of seriously to critically ill patients remain in the 400s for days right now. So give us a look at how the situation is.
Sure. So actually, as we're still seeing tens of thousands of daily COVID-19 cases, in the case we're not allowed to cheer on the street, it might also help in, you know, stopping the spread of the virus if we look at it from the positive side. And you know what's actually been trending during COVID-19 is beer parties online, right? How people gather on Zoom or other platforms.
Virtual, yeah.
And I actually got an offer as an MC for the World Cup because they already organized parties where people gather online to cheer together. So that's an alternative.
I don't know how that event would go on and why you need a host for that. I'm just trying to picture how that event will go. Okay, anyways,
we're seeing more than 72,000 infections this Tuesday as of 12 a.m. And this is the highest figure in 69 days. However, if you compare this figure to the week before on Tuesday, it's actually almost the same. So we're not seeing a decrease, but also it's difficult to say that this is an increase. Meanwhile, there have been 81 cases from abroad in the past day. And for the fourth straight day, the number of patients in severe critical condition remains in the 400s. And 45 people were reported to have died from COVID-19 in the past day. And also recently, we just surpassed 30,000 fatalities in total due to COVID-19. Now, meanwhile, the government designated a 4-week special period that started yesterday to encourage people to get booster shots, the so-called retooled vaccines that were especially targeted at Omicron as well as earlier strains, and especially for those that are in high-risk groups or elderly people, in particular those at senior care hospitals or nursing homes.
Yeah, the concerning thing is my dad, the other day, I think he got the booster shot for the BA4, BA5. He said when he went to the clinic, there was like nobody there getting the booster shot. And that's been the other concern, right? Just people not really wanting to get these shots anymore because they're saying, well, look, we got all these booster shots, but we still got COVID-19. And so what's the point? But still, if you are in the high risk age group, I think it's a good thing to just get vaccinated is what I think. And that's what experts are saying as well.
And I think you don't have to register anymore.
No.
Beforehand, you can just
kind of
go
walk in,
to the clinic.
No reservations.
Yeah, I think that's what my dad did. In the meantime, China fighting numerous COVID-19 flare-ups, warning that the country is facing its most severe test of COVID-19. Some of the districts tightening rules to curb further spread. As we know, China has been very strict all these times. Let's round things out very quickly here.
Yeah, so China's capital, Beijing, posted a record number of new COVID cases on Tuesday, and the severity of the recent resurge in the pandemic has led to the shutting down of businesses and schools, and hard-hit districts are tightening their rules for entering the city. And Guangzhou, a southern city of nearly 19 million people, is also battling the largest of China's recent outbreaks. And so they ordered a 5-day lockdown for Baiyun, which is the most populous district in this province. And it suspended dine-in services, shut nightclubs, theaters, and the city's main business district. And even some office buildings, they limited the number of employees who can come into office in a day. And starting today, those flying into Beijing from outside will have to get PCR tests not just once, but for 3 consecutive days. They've been strengthening their measures because the number of newly infected patients surpassed 20,000 for the 5 consecutive day right now. And they saw a death from COVID-19, which occurred for the first time in 5 months. And this strengthening of measures is likely to hit the economy hard once again because they're going through this expansion of lockdowns throughout the country.
Yeah, and that's been kind of the criticism by the Chinese residents is that, I mean, come on, the rest of the world is kind of opening up. They've been opened up and, they kind of have to live this way, but they continue to lock down. The economy isn't going to be good. Paulina Maldonado very quickly says here in the UK last night, some Koreans were saying that it's ridiculous the government banned watching football in the streets. Well, it's not that they banned it. It's like KFA basically took out the registration for the cheering to go on in consideration of what happened. And now they just need to go through the whole filing phase once again. Benny says, Chihi, very quickly, are you an every 4-year fan of the South Korean national football team?
Yeah.
Yes, there you go. We add another list of the roster of the every 4-year fans here on Korea Now. Guys, thank you very much for coming in with your report. Stay safe. We'll see you guys again.
See you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.